Where are you going, princess? Trace Connor grabbed Amara's skirt, yanking her back in the deserted hallway. It's time to clap that insolent girl, he snarled, his boys circling like wolves. Big mistake. The quiet new girl from Detroit slowly turned around, and something deadly flickered in her eyes. For a heartbeat, time froze. Trace still gripping her skirt like he owned her, while Amara stood perfectly still, calculating. The tension was suffocating. Then she spoke. "Remove your hands," her voice was ice cold, "or I'll remove them for you." Trace laughed, tightening his grip. "What's a little ghetto girl gonna do?" Amara smiled like a predator. "I'll break your wrist in 10, 9, 8.8. "You're hilarious," Trace sneered, completely unaware that in 30 seconds he'd be screaming on the floor, and by tomorrow the entire school district would know the name Amara Johnson. The most interesting part is still to come. Stay tuned to find out how it all ends. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millfield High's pristine parking lot as Amara Johnson stepped out of her mother's aging Honda Civic. September air carried the crisp promise of autumn, but the warmth hadn't quite surrendered to the changing season. She adjusted her backpack straps and took in the sprawling brick building before her, all manicured lawns, gleaming windows, and that particular suburban perfection that money could buy. Third school in 2 years. The thought settled in her stomach like a stone. "You sure you're ready for this, baby?" Dr. Patricia Johnson called through the car window, her scrub still wrinkled from the night shift at Millfield General. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed another sleepless night, but her smile remained steady and encouraging. "Ready as I'll ever be, Mom." Amara's voice carried the practiced calm of someone who had learned to adapt quickly. "It's just another building, with books and teenagers." Patricia studied her daughter's face, recognizing the subtle tension around her eyes. "Remember what we talked about? Keep my head down, focus on grades, graduate, and get out." Amara recited the familiar mantra with a slight smile. "I know the drill." As the Honda pulled away, Amara stood alone in the sea of luxury vehicles that surrounded her like automotive jewelry. BMW sedans, Mercedes SUVs, and the occasional Tesla created a stark contrast to the modest car that had just departed. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself, not from cold, but from the familiar feeling of being observed. The scrutiny began immediately. Conversations paused as she walked through the main entrance. Eyes followed her movement down the hallway with the casual curiosity reserved for exotic animals in a zoo. Whispered comments floated behind her like smoke, just loud enough to be heard but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Is that the new scholarship girl? I heard her mom's a nurse or something. Wonder where she's from." Amara had developed selective hearing for such observations over the years. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that dignity was an inside job, something no one could take from you unless you handed it over willingly. She kept her shoulders straight and her expression neutral as she navigated the halls, mentally mapping the layout with the efficiency of someone who had done this dance before. First period American history passed without incident. Mrs. Henderson, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, welcomed her warmly and assigned her a seat near the window. The lesson on colonial settlements provided a safe harbor from curious stares, and Amara took careful notes, grateful for the temporary anonymity that homework could provide. Second period biology proved equally uneventful. Mr. Kim's enthusiasm for cellular structure created enough distraction to keep most students focused on their textbooks rather than the new arrival. Amara found herself appreciating the universal language of science. Facts remained facts regardless of geography or social dynamics. But lunch period would prove to be an entirely different battlefield. The cafeteria stretched before her like a carefully organized social map. Popular students claimed the center tables with the territorial confidence of lions surveying their domain. Athletes clustered near the windows, their letter jackets forming a sea of school colors. Theater kids gathered around tables covered with scripts and creative energy. Academic achievers occupied the quieter corners, textbooks scattered among lunch trays like intellectual breadcrumbs. Amara surveyed the landscape, tray in hand, searching for neutral territory. She had learned to read these social ecosystems quickly, Survival often depended on understanding the unspoken rules that govern teenage hierarchies. Well, well, what do we have here? The voice carried across several tables with the confident projection of someone accustomed to being heard. Trace Connor rose from the center table like a golden prince ascending his throne. 6 feet 2 inches of carefully maintained athletic perfection, he moved with the fluid grace of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His blonde hair caught the fluorescent lighting just right, and his smile revealed teeth that spoke of excellent dental care and genetic privilege. Behind him, his court followed with practiced synchronization. Brad Matthews, the loyal lieutenant with calculating eyes. Kyle Henderson, whose bulk suggested hours in the weight room and a limited vocabulary. Madison Pierce, whose perfectly applied makeup and designer clothes marked her as both ally and potential rival. "You must be the new student we've heard so much about." Trace approached with open arms and a welcoming smile that somehow managed to feel both inclusive and condescending. "I'm Trace Connor, student body president and captain of the football team." Amara studied his face, noting the way his eyes didn't quite match his smile. "Amara Johnson, nice to meet you." "Johnson." He repeated her name as if tasting wine, rolling it around in his mouth before delivering his verdict. "That's a good, solid American name. And you're from Detroit, right?" "Motor City. Tough place, I hear." The way he said tough carried implications that hung in the air like smoke. Amara recognized the technique, the subtle probe disguised as friendly conversation, the gentle establishment of otherness wrapped in apparent welcome. "It has its challenges," she replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. "I bet it does." Trace's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "Well, you're in paradise now. Millfield takes care of its own, especially when they come from more challenging backgrounds. We believe in helping those who might need a little extra guidance to fit in." The patronizing tone was wrapped in silk, but the underlying message rang clear as a bell. Madison giggled softly behind her manicured fingers, while Brad smirked with the expression of someone watching a particularly entertaining show. "That's very thoughtful," Amara said, her voice maintaining its careful neutrality. "But I think I can manage to figure out how lunch tables work." A brief shadow crossed Trace's features, so quick that someone less observant might have missed it entirely. He wasn't accustomed to gentle deflection of his magnanimous offers. Of course. Independent spirit. I respect that." He recovered smoothly, his politician's smile sliding back into place. "But if you ever need anything, guidance about which classes to take, which teachers to avoid, which crowds might be more suitable for someone with your background, just let me know. I've got connections throughout the school." The offer carried the subtle weight of expectation, the unspoken understanding that such kindness would naturally require some form of reciprocation. Amara had encountered this type before, the benevolent dictator who wrapped control in the language of assistance. "I appreciate the offer," she said, shifting her tray slightly. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll find a quiet spot to eat." She moved toward an empty table near the back corner, aware that multiple pairs of eyes tracked her movement. Behind her, she could hear Trace's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. "Sweet girl, just needs some time to adjust to how things work around here. Culture shock. You know how it is." Amara settled at her chosen table, unwrapped her sandwich, and began to eat with the deliberate calm of someone who had learned not to react to provocations. But her peripheral vision remained active, cataloging the players in this new drama, noting the subtle power structures that govern this particular ecosystem. As she chewed her turkey sandwich, she reflected on the morning's interactions. Millfield High operated on a different frequency than her previous schools, more subtle in its hierarchies, more sophisticated in its exclusions. The violence here would be social rather than physical, wrapped in the language of concern and assistance, rather than delivered through crude intimidation. She finished her lunch in peaceful solitude, but the silence felt temporary, like the calm before a storm that hadn't quite reached the horizon yet. As students began clearing their tables and heading to afternoon classes, Amara gathered her belongings with the measured movements of someone preparing for a longer campaign. The afternoon brought Spanish with Senora Martinez, where conjugating verbs provided blessed relief from social navigation, followed by physical education with Coach Stevens. In the gymnasium, Amara's natural athleticism became apparent as they played volleyball. Her movements carried a precision and awareness that caught the attention of both teammates and opponents. "Nice reflexes," commented Sophia Chen, a petite girl with intelligent eyes and an air of cautious observation. "You play sports back in Detroit?" "Just stayed active," Amara replied, deflecting the question with practiced ease. She had learned long ago that some truths were better kept private until the landscape became clearer. As the final bell rang and students streamed toward the exits, Amara found herself walking behind a group of Trace's friends. Their conversation floated back to her, clearly intended for her ears. "Did you see how she moved in gym class? Almost like she's had training or something." "Training in what? Dancing? That's about all they're good for where she comes from. Trace thinks she's playing hard to get, wants to see how long her attitude lasts." Amara maintained her steady pace, neither speeding up nor slowing down, filing away the information for future reference. As she pushed through the exit doors, she found Sophia Chen waiting by the bike racks, looking like someone working up the courage to speak. "Hey," Sophia said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I just wanted to say, be careful around Trace and his crowd. They seem friendly at first, but they don't like it when people don't play by their rules." Amara studied the other girl's face, recognizing something familiar in her expression, the wariness of someone who had learned certain lessons the hard way. "Thanks for the heads up," Amara said. "Any particular rules I should know about?" Sophia hesitated, then looked around once more before speaking. "Just don't let them think they can manage you, and don't trust the smiles. They mean something different here than they do in most places." As Sophia pedaled away on her bicycle, Amara stood in the parking lot watching the social dynamics play out around her. Groups formed and reformed, conversations started and stopped, and through it all, she could feel the weight of observation from multiple directions. She walked to the designated pickup spot where her mother would collect her, but her mind wasn't on the ride home. Instead, she found herself thinking about Sophia's warning, about Trace's too perfect smile, about the way Madison had giggled at precisely the right moments. When Dr. Johnson's Honda pulled up, Amara slid into the passenger seat with the deliberate movements of someone processing a complex equation. "How was your first day, baby?" her mother asked, studying her daughter's face in the rearview mirror. "Educational," Amara replied, which was perhaps the most honest answer she could give. That evening, as Amara sat at her desk completing homework assignments, she reflected on the day's events with the methodical analysis her grandmother had taught her. Millfield High operated according to rules that weren't posted on any bulletin board. Subtle codes of behavior, unspoken hierarchies, and social contracts written in invisible ink. But what bothered her most wasn't the existence of these rules. It was the casual assumption that she would automatically accept her assigned place within them. The expectation that gratitude for inclusion would naturally translate into compliance with whatever boundaries others chose to establish. She closed her history textbook and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. Somewhere in this peaceful landscape lurked the same fundamental dynamics she had encountered everywhere else. The strong preying upon the weak, the entitled demanding submission from the vulnerable, the comfortable maintaining their positions through carefully applied pressure. But what Trace Connor and his golden circle didn't yet understand was that Amara Johnson had spent 8 years learning a very different set of rules. Rules about the difference between strength and force. As she prepared for bed, Amara allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring new lessons for everyone involved. Chapter 2. The Rules of Engagement. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem sharper, more defined. Amara walked through Millfield High's front doors with the measured pace of someone who understood that the real education was about to begin. The hallways buzzed with typical pre-first period energy, but she noticed the subtle shift in attention as she passed, conversations that paused just long enough to acknowledge her presence before resuming. Her locker assignment placed her in prime real estate, directly across from the main bulletin board where announcements competed for space with college recruitment flyers and homecoming committee propaganda. As she worked the combination, she became aware of approaching footsteps with the distinctive rhythm of designer sneakers on polished linoleum. Amara! Perfect timing. Trace Connor materialized beside her with the supernatural ability of someone who made it his business to know where everyone belonged. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from yesterday. She glanced at him while organizing her books, noting how he positioned himself to command the corridor's attention. Every interaction was a performance, she realized, conducted for the benefit of whatever audience happened to be available. What conversation would that be? She asked, her tone politely neutral. About fitting in, finding your place. His smile carried the warmth of a politician addressing constituents. I've been thinking about ways to help you integrate more smoothly into our community. The word integrate hung in the air with particular weight, and Amara recognized the linguistic precision behind its selection. Not join or participate, integrate, with all its historical implications and expectations of adaptation, flowing in one direction only. That's thoughtful, she replied, closing her locker with deliberate care. But I'm managing fine on my own. Of course you are. Trace's laugh held just enough condescension to be noticeable without crossing into obvious rudeness. But why struggle unnecessarily when you could benefit from some experienced guidance? I know which teachers have particular expectations for students from different backgrounds. Madison Pierce appeared at Trace's shoulder like a perfectly timed stage entrance, her presence adding visual confirmation to whatever point he was attempting to make. Her outfit probably cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month, and she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned her right to occupy space. We were just talking about the importance of presentation, Madison chimed in, her gaze traveling over Amara's simple cardigan and jean with a clinical assessment of a quality control inspector. First impressions matter so much here. People notice everything. Amara recognized the technique, the gentle correction disguised as helpful advice, the suggestion in that improvement was both necessary and generously being offered by those qualified to provide it. I appreciate your concern about my presentation, Amara said evenly. I'll keep that in mind. The diplomatic response seemed to surprise them both. Madison's perfectly glossed lips formed a small O of confusion, while Trace's political smile flickered momentarily before reasserting itself. Wonderful. Receptiveness to feedback is so important for growth. Trace stepped closer, lowering his voice to create artificial intimacy. Why don't you sit with us at lunch today? We can discuss some strategies for maximizing your Millfield experience. The invitation carried the weight of expectation, wrapped in the language of opportunity. Amara understood that this was likely her last chance to accept voluntary inclusion before more direct methods of social management were employed. Thanks, but I prefer eating quietly. Helps me digest better. This time the mask slipped entirely. For just a moment, Trace's expression revealed something harder beneath the golden boy exterior, a flash of irritation that someone had dared to decline his magnanimous offer twice. Sure, independent spirit. I get it. His voice carried a new edge that Madison seemed to recognize because she took a small step backward. Just remember that independence can sometimes look like unfriendliness to people who are trying to help. The warning was delivered with enough subtlety to maintain plausible deniability, but its meaning rang clear as a church bell. Amara met his gaze directly, allowing a moment of silence to stretch between them before responding. I'll try to remember that, she said, shouldering her backpack. Thanks for the guidance. As she walked toward first period, she could feel their eyes following her movement. Behind her, she caught fragments of whispered conversation that were clearly intended for her ears. Some people just don't know how to accept kindness. Give it time. Reality has a way of teaching certain lessons. First period, American history passed without incident, but second period biology revealed the first concrete manifestation of Trace's displeasure. When Amara opened her textbook, she discovered that someone had used a yellow highlighter to mark specific passages about adaptation and natural selection, with handwritten notes in the margins that read, "Some species struggle more than others to adapt to new environments." The message was clear, juvenile, and surprisingly effective in its psychological targeting. Mr. Kim was deep in lecture mode, making it impossible to address the vandalism without disrupting the entire class. Amara closed the book quietly and took notes directly from the board, filing the incident away as valuable intelligence about her opponent's methods. Lunch period brought the next escalation in what was becoming a carefully orchestrated campaign. As she entered the cafeteria, Amara noticed that her usual back corner table had been claimed by a group of underclassmen who kept glancing nervously in Trace's direction. Every other available seat seemed to have been mysteriously reserved or occupied by strategically placed backpacks. Sophia Chen caught her eye from across the room and gestured toward an empty chair at her table. Grateful for the lifeline, Amara navigated through the social minefield and settled beside the other girl. "Let me guess," Sophia said quietly, unwrapping her sandwich with practiced efficiency. "Suddenly there's nowhere to sit except with the people who want to manage your existence?" "Something like that." Amara opened her own lunch, impressed by Sophia's ability to read the situation so accurately. "I take it you've seen this particular dance before?" Sophia's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Oh, I've had front row seats to this performance multiple times. Trace has a very specific playbook for dealing with people who don't immediately recognize his authority. And what comes next in this playbook? Isolation first. Make sure you understand that social acceptance flows through him and his circle. Then escalation. Little inconveniences that could be accidents, but somehow always happen to the same people." Sophia paused to take a bite before continuing. "Finally, if you still don't get the message, things become more direct." As if summoned by their conversation, Trace appeared at their table with Brad and Kyle flanking him like well-dressed bodyguards. His approach drew attention from surrounding tables, creating an audience for whatever performance was about to unfold. "Sophia, and our new friend Amara." His voice carried across several tables with practiced projection. "I couldn't help but notice you two sitting together. How nice that you found each other." The way he said, "found each other," carried implications that made several nearby students snicker quietly. Sophia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who had learned to navigate these waters carefully. "Just enjoying lunch," Sophia replied evenly. "Of course. And Amara, I hope you're finding everything you need. Sometimes it takes time to understand where you fit best." Trace's smile was all teeth and sharp edges. Some people are naturally suited for leadership roles, while others are more comfortable in supportive positions. The hierarchy he was establishing couldn't have been clearer if he had drawn a diagram on the cafeteria wall. Amara continued eating her sandwich with deliberate calm, refusing to provide the reaction he was clearly seeking. "I'm still figuring things out," she said neutrally. "Smart approach. Observation before action." Trace leaned closer, his voice dropping to create the illusion of confidential advice. "Just remember that in communities like ours, reputation is everything. People talk, and sometimes those conversations can really impact someone's experience here." The threat was wrapped in silk, but its steel core was unmistakable. Several students at nearby tables were now openly watching the interaction, their phones discreetly positioned to capture whatever might happen next. "I'll keep that in mind," Amara replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. Trace straightened up, his smile widening as if she had just agreed to something significant. "Excellent. Communication is so important, don't you think? It prevents misunderstandings that might lead to unfortunate situations." As he walked away with his entourage, the cafeteria's energy shifted subtly. Conversations resumed, but with a different quality, the excited murmur of spectators who had just witnessed the opening moves of a larger drama. "Well," Sophia said quietly, "you've officially been marked for special attention. How does it feel to be Trace Connor's newest project?" "Educational," Amara replied, echoing her response to her mother the previous day. The afternoon brought physical education, where Coach Stevens organized the class into teams for flag football. Through what seemed like pure coincidence, Amara found herself assigned to a team directly opposing Trace's group. The game proceeded normally until she intercepted a pass intended for Brad, demonstrating the kind of reflexes and spatial awareness that made everyone stop and take notice. "Nice catch," Trace called out, but his tone carried an undertone that transformed the compliment into something else entirely. "You've got some real aggressive instincts." The word aggressive was carefully chosen and deliberately emphasized, designed to activate certain stereotypes in the minds of their classmates. Several students exchanged meaningful glances, and Amara realized she was witnessing a masterclass in social manipulation. "Just trying to play the game," she responded simply. "Of course, games are important. They teach us about rules, boundaries, consequences." Trace's smile never wavered, but something predatory had entered his expression. Some people are natural rule followers. Others need more direct instruction. As the class period ended and students headed toward the locker rooms, Amara found herself walking beside Marcus Thompson, a senior she recognized from the hallways but hadn't yet spoken to directly. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place rather than inherited it. "That was an interesting demonstration," Marcus said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Both on the field and off." "Just playing flag football," Amara replied, but she studied his face, recognizing something familiar in his expression. "Right, and I'm just a student who happens to have watched this particular movie several times before." Marcus paused at the intersection of hallways that led to different locker rooms. "Word of advice? Trace doesn't like being shown up, especially not in front of an audience, and he really doesn't like people who won't play by his rules." "What kind of rules are we talking about?" Marcus looked around once more before answering. "The kind where some people get to be human beings and others get to be examples of what happens when you forget your place." As they parted ways, Amara reflected on the day's accumulating evidence. The pattern was becoming clear, a systematic campaign designed to establish hierarchy, demand submission, and punish resistance through increasingly direct methods. That evening, as she completed homework assignments, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Some people learn the easy way, others learn the hard way. Your choice." She stared at the message for several long moments before deleting it without responding. But as she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about timing and escalation, about the difference between defensive and offensive strategies, about the precise moment when diplomatic solutions became inadequate for the situation at hand. Tomorrow would bring new lessons for everyone involved. Some would learn about persistence and patience. Others would learn about the dangers of mistaking silence for weakness. Chapter 3. The Line in the Sand. Wednesday brought the kind of unseasonable warmth that made everyone restless, as if the weather itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Amara moved through her morning classes with heightened awareness, noting the subtle shifts in social dynamics that had occurred overnight. Whispered conversations stopped when she approached, and she caught glimpses of students checking their phones with the particular intensity reserved for developing drama. During second period biology, she discovered the source of the increased attention. Someone had created a group chat called New Girl Watch that apparently included half the junior class. Screenshots of text messages were being passed around like underground currency. And Amara caught enough fragments to understand that her interactions with Trace had become a source of entertainment and speculation. She thinks she's better than everyone. Wait until reality hits her. Trace is just being nice. She doesn't appreciate it. The narrative was being carefully constructed, she realized. Every diplomatic response she had given was being reframed as arrogance. Every attempt to maintain independence was being painted as disrespect for the established order. By lunchtime, the atmosphere in the cafeteria had shifted noticeably. Sophia Chen looked nervous as Amara approached their usual table, glancing repeatedly toward Trace's section where animated conversations were taking place. "Something's different today," Sophia said quietly, unwrapping her sandwich with hands that weren't quite steady. "The energy feels charged." Amara followed her gaze across the cafeteria. Trace was holding court at his center table, surrounded by a larger group than usual. His gestures were more animated, his voice carrying farther, and his audience was hanging on every word with the rapt attention of people witnessing something significant. "He's been talking about respect," Sophia continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "about how some people need to learn their place through experience rather than conversation." "And what kind of experience would that be?" Before Sophia could answer, the cafeteria fell silent with the sudden completeness of a theater when the curtain rises. Trace had stood up, and his movement commanded attention with the magnetic pull of impending conflict. He began walking toward their table with the deliberate pace of someone who had rehearsed this moment in his mind. Behind him, his entourage followed like well-trained soldiers, while the rest of the cafeteria watched with the breathless anticipation of spectators at a gladiatorial arena. "Amara," Trace said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed space, "we need to have that conversation we've been putting off." She remained seated, continuing to eat her apple with movements that betrayed none of the tension coiling in her muscles. What conversation would that be? The one about community standards, about how people show respect for the place that's welcomed them. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Some lessons are better learned publicly, don't you think? The challenge was unmistakable now, delivered in front of an audience that would remember every detail and spread the story throughout the school within hours. Amara recognized this as the moment Sophia had warned her about, the transition from subtle pressure to direct confrontation. "I think respect is earned, not demanded," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. A collective intake of breath rippled through the cafeteria. Several students had their phones out now, not even pretending to hide their recording. This was the kind of moment that would live forever in the digital ecosystem of high school social dynamics. "Earned." Trace repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. "That's interesting, coming from someone who hasn't done anything to earn her place here yet." He moved closer, looming over their table with the physical intimidation that his size and athletic build made possible. Sophia shrank back instinctively, but Amara remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed but alert. "Maybe it's time for a practical demonstration of how things work in our community," Trace continued, his voice dropping to a register that somehow made it more menacing than if he had shouted. "Some people learn through explanation. Others need more direct instruction." The cafeteria had become completely silent now, hundreds of students holding their breath as they witnessed what felt like a defining moment. Amara could sense the weight of their attention, the way this confrontation was becoming larger than just two teenagers disagreeing about lunch table politics. "I'm always interested in learning," she said calmly, "but I prefer my lessons to come from qualified teachers." The insult was delivered with such polite precision that it took a moment for its full impact to register. When it did, Trace's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened, and something dangerous flickered across his features. "You know what?" he said, his politician's smile replaced by something much more honest and far more ugly. "I think it's time you understood exactly who you're dealing with." What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. The final bell of the day had just rung when Amara found herself walking down the main corridor toward the exit. The hallway was crowded with students heading to after-school activities, athletic practices, and part-time jobs. Conversations echoed off the walls, locker doors slammed with metallic finality, and the general chaos of dismissal created a perfect storm of noise and movement. She was almost to the main entrance when she heard his voice behind her. "Where are you going, princess?" The tone was different now, stripped of its earlier pretense of civility, raw with frustrated authority, and something darker that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Amara didn't stop walking, didn't turn around, didn't give any indication that she had heard him at all. That was apparently the wrong response. Trace Connor grabbed the hem of her modest blue skirt and yanked her backward with enough force to make her stumble. The fabric twisted in his grip as he held her in place, his fingers possessive and demanding on material that had no business being in anyone's hands but her own. "It's time to clap that insolent girl," he snarled, his mask finally and completely discarded. His boys circled around them like wolves sensing wounded prey, their faces bright with anticipation of whatever lesson their leader was about to deliver. The hallway didn't fall silent this time. It exploded into chaos. Students stopped mid-conversation, phones appeared like magic, and a circle formed around the confrontation with the instant organization that only teenagers could achieve when witnessing potential drama. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, time crystallized into perfect clarity. Trace still gripping her skirt like he owned her, his crew smirking in anticipation of her humiliation, while dozens of students watched and recorded what they assumed would be another victory for the established order. Amara stood perfectly still in that frozen moment, her breathing controlled, her mind calculating angles and possibilities with the precision of someone who had spent years training for exactly this type of situation. Then she turned around. The movement was deliberate, economical, and somehow more threatening than any aggressive gesture could have been. When she faced him, something in her dark eyes made several students unconsciously step backward. "Remove your hands," or her voice was ice cold and perfectly controlled, "or I'll remove them for you." Trace laughed, but there was a note of uncertainty in it now. His grip tightened on her skirt as if that would somehow reassert his dominance over the situation. "What's a little ghetto girl gonna do?" he sneered, playing to his audience, but no longer sounding entirely convinced of his own superiority. Amara smiled then, and it was the expression of a predator who had finally been given permission to stop pretending to be prey. "I'll break your wrist in 10, 9, 8.8. "You're hilarious," Trace said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Something in her countdown was making him nervous, though he couldn't quite identify what. 7, 6, 5 dots. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every second of what was clearly building towards something unprecedented in Millfield High's carefully controlled social ecosystem. 4, 3 dots, 2 dots. Trace's smirk was becoming forced now, his grip on her skirt the only thing maintaining his illusion of control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his understanding. 1. What happened next would be analyzed, discussed, and debated for years to come. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, Amara moved with a speed and precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics as understood by everyone watching. Her hand closed over Trace's wrist with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed, applying pressure to specific points that made him release her skirt immediately and involuntarily. Before he could react or resist, she had twisted his arm into a position that made him drop to his knees with a sound that was part gasp, part whimper, and entirely unexpected. The hallway erupted into chaos. Students screamed, phones captured every angle, and Trace Connor, golden boy, student body president, and self-appointed king of Millfield High, found himself kneeling on the floor at the feet of the quiet girl from Detroit he had so severely underestimated. "Now," Amara said conversationally, maintaining her hold with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, "let's discuss respect." Chapter 4. When the dam breaks. The hallway chaos erupted like a dam bursting after years of pressure. Students pressed closer, their phones capturing every angle of Trace Connor, kneeling on the polished linoleum with Amara's hand controlling his wrist with surgical precision. The golden boy's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he discovered that his carefully maintained image was crumbling in real time. "Let me go," he gasped, his voice stripped of its usual commanding authority. "You're crazy. Someone help me." But help wasn't coming. His loyal crew stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process the sight of their invincible leader, brought low by someone they had dismissed as powerless. Brad's mouth hung open like a broken door, while Kyle's eyes darted between Amara and Trace as if trying to solve an impossible equation. "Help you?" Amara's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "I thought you wanted to teach me about respect. Consider this a practical demonstration of the concept." She applied slight pressure to a specific nerve point, making Trace wince visibly. Several students gasped, and the circle of spectators grew larger as word spread through the building with the speed that only high school gossip could achieve. "Now," she continued, her tone becoming more instructional, "let's discuss boundaries. When someone says no, what's the appropriate response?" "This is assault," Trace managed to croak, his politician's instincts kicking in even while kneeling in submission. "Everyone's recording this. You're finished at this school." Amara's smile was serene, almost peaceful. "Actually, they're recording you grabbing my skirt without permission and threatening to assault me. I believe that's called evidence." The crowd murmured with recognition of this truth. Several students were indeed still recording, but their cameras had captured the entire sequence. Trace's aggressive approach, his inappropriate contact, his threatening language, and Amara's controlled response. "She attacked me!" Trace appealed directly to his audience, desperation creeping into his voice. You all saw it. I was just talking to her. Talking? Marcus Thompson's voice cut through the noise as he pushed through the crowd. His presence brought a different energy to the situation. Someone with enough social standing to provide objective commentary. Man, we all saw you grab her. That's not talking. Sophia Chen had appeared beside Marcus, her phone also recording, but her expression showed something beyond mere curiosity. For the first time since Amara had known her, Sophia looked genuinely hopeful, as if she was witnessing something she had long dreamed of but never believed possible. 8 years, Amara said quietly, speaking directly to Trace but loud enough for the crowd to hear. 8 years of training in Shotokan karate, 3rd-degree black belt. Did you really think grabbing me was going to end the way you planned? The revelation rippled through the crowd like an electric shock. Phones buzzed with frantic texting as the news spread to students throughout the building and beyond. The quiet new girl from Detroit wasn't quite what anyone had assumed. You're lying, Trace said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence of her skill was currently controlling his nervous system through precise pressure points that definitely weren't taught in any high school health class. Am I? Amara adjusted her grip slightly, demonstrating a level of anatomical knowledge that made several pre-med students in the crowd take notes. Would you like me to show everyone the difference between a pain compliance hold and an actual submission technique? No! Trace's composure finally cracked completely. Please, just let me go. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. The apology rang through the hallway with crystal clarity, captured by dozens of recording devices and transmitted instantly to social media platforms where it would live forever. The student body president of Millfield High, reduced to begging for mercy from the girl he had tried to humiliate. Amara held the position for one more moment, allowing the lesson to sink in for everyone present, then released him with the same fluid efficiency she had used to apply it. Trace immediately cradled his wrist, rolling away from her and struggling to his feet with whatever dignity he could salvage. This isn't over, he said, but the threat carried no weight after what everyone had just witnessed. My father will hear about this. The police will hear about this. You have no idea who you're messing with. Actually, Amara replied, straightening her skirt with calm precision, I think I have a pretty good idea. The question is whether you've figured out who you were messing with. The crowd began to disperse as the sound of approaching adult footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mr. Peterson, the vice principal, was heading their way with the determined stride of someone responding to reports of disturbance. Students melted away like snow in sunshine, but not before uploading their videos to every social platform available. What's happening here? Mr. Peterson demanded, his gaze taking in Trace's disheveled appearance and the obvious signs of recent conflict. Nothing, Trace said quickly, his political instincts reasserting themselves. Just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine now. But everything was not fine, and everyone present knew it. The old social order had been challenged in the most public way possible, and the results were already spreading beyond the confines of Millfield High's hallways. By the time Amara reached her mother's car in the pickup line, her phone was buzzing with friend requests, messages, and notifications from social media platforms she didn't even use. The video of her encounter with Trace was already being shared across multiple networks, each post gathering comments and reactions at an exponential rate. How was your day, baby? Dr. Johnson asked, noting her daughter's thoughtful expression. Eventful, Amara replied, which was becoming her standard response to that particular question. That evening, as Amara sat at her desk completing homework assignments, her phone continued its electronic symphony of notifications. The video had been viewed thousands of times, shared across school districts, and was beginning to attract attention from anti-bullying organizations and local news outlets. But more interesting than the viral spread were the personal messages she was receiving. Students from Millfield and other schools were sharing their own stories of harassment, intimidation, and abuse. Sophia Chen had sent a long text describing years of torment that she had endured in silence. Marcus Thompson had forwarded screenshots of group chats where other students were finally speaking up about Trace's behavior. The dam hadn't just broken in that hallway confrontation, it had broken throughout the entire community. Students who had suffered in isolation were discovering that they weren't alone, that someone had finally stood up to the system that had protected bullies while silencing their victims. Around 10 o'clock, her mother knocked on her bedroom door with an expression that mixed pride with concern. "Baby, I just got a call from the school. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning before classes start." Amara looked up from her chemistry homework. "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where they use words like incident report and disciplinary review." Dr. Johnson sat on the edge of the bed. "They also mentioned something about police involvement and potential charges." "Against me? That's what we're going to find out." Her mother's voice carried the steel that had helped her navigate medical school as a single parent. "But I want you to know that whatever happened today, whatever you did, I trust your judgment, and we'll face whatever comes next together." Amara nodded, understanding that the real battle was just beginning. Trace had played his first institutional card, attempting to use the system's machinery to punish her for refusing to accept her assigned place in his social hierarchy. But systems could be challenged, hierarchies could be disrupted, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice was simply refusing to accept it as inevitable. As she prepared for bed, Amara reflected on the day's events with the analytical mindset her grandmother had taught her. The physical confrontation had been necessary and successful, but it was only the opening move in a larger game. Tomorrow would bring administrators, parents, and possibly law enforcement, all of whom would need to understand that self-defense was not the same as aggression, that standing up to a bully was not equivalent to being one. Her phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from Sophia Chen. "Thank you for showing us that we don't have to be afraid anymore." Amara smiled as she turned off the light. Tomorrow's battles would be fought with words instead of wrist locks, in conference rooms instead of hallways, but the fundamental principle remained the same. Some lines should never be crossed, and when they are, the consequences should be swift, decisive, and educational for everyone involved. Chapter 6. New Foundations. 3 months later, Millfield High School looked the same from the outside, but anyone who had walked its hallways before the transformation could feel the fundamental shift in its atmosphere. The change wasn't visible in the brick and mortar, but in the way students carried themselves, the way conversations flowed, and the way problems were addressed before they could fester into something dangerous. Amara Johnson stood in the main hallway during the lunch period, watching the social dynamics that had once seemed so rigid now operating with a fluidity that would have been impossible to imagine during her first week at the school. Students from different backgrounds mingled freely, conversations crossed traditional social boundaries, and the underlying tension that had once permeated every interaction had been replaced by something approaching genuine community. "Hard to believe it's the same place, isn't it?" Marcus Thompson approached with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. As the newly elected student body president, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his position through service rather than inheritance. "It's like watching a patient recover from a serious illness," Amara replied, drawing on metaphors she had learned from her mother's medical career. "The healing happens gradually, but when you step back and look at the whole picture, the change is remarkable." Marcus nodded toward the cafeteria, where Sophia Chen was leading a discussion at a table that had become the unofficial headquarters of the newly formed Student Advocacy Council. "Sophia's presentation to the school board last week was incredible. I never would have imagined her speaking publicly about anything, let alone organizing a district-wide anti-harassment campaign." The transformation of Sophia Chen had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the school's recovery. The quiet girl who had once lived in constant fear of attracting attention had discovered a voice that carried the power of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. Her testimony about years of silent suffering had moved the school board to tears and prompted immediate policy changes throughout the district. "People find their strength when they discover they're not alone," Amara observed, watching Sophia explain legal rights to a group of underclassmen who hung on her every word. "Sometimes all it takes is one example to show others what's possible." The institutional changes had been swift and comprehensive. The new principal, Dr. Michelle Rodriguez, had arrived with a reputation for progressive leadership and a mandate to rebuild the school's culture from the ground up. Her first act had been to establish the Student Safety Initiative, a comprehensive program that created multiple reporting mechanisms, mandatory training for all staff, and clear consequences for harassment of any kind. The old vice principal, Peterson, had been transferred to a district office position where his primary responsibility involved filing paperwork rather than making decisions that affected student welfare. The coaching staff had been entirely retrained after an investigation revealed that the athletic department had been operating as a separate kingdom with its own rules about acceptable behavior. The ripple effects have been incredible, Marcus continued, consulting the tablet he used to manage his expanding responsibilities. I got an email yesterday from a student at East Millfield saying they've implemented similar programs after seeing our success. 3 other districts have reached out asking for consultation on their own reforms. The viral video that had started everything had evolved into something far beyond a moment of internet fame. Anti-bullying organizations had used it as a training tool. Legal advocates had cited it in policy recommendations, and education reformers had pointed to Millfield's transformation as proof that systemic change was possible when communities committed to justice over convenience. But perhaps the most significant changes were the personal ones that couldn't be measured in policy documents or statistical reports. Jamie Wilson, the girl who had recorded the original confrontation, had discovered a talent for documentary filmmaking and was now creating a series about student empowerment that had been picked up by the district's educational media program. Her work was being used in schools across 3 states as a tool for discussing bystander intervention and the power of bearing witness to injustice. Brad Matthews and Kyle Henderson, Trace's former lieutenants, had undergone their own difficult reckonings. After initially trying to maintain their positions in the social hierarchy, they had been forced to confront the reality that their behavior had caused real harm to real people. Both were now participating in restorative justice programs, working with counselors to understand the psychology behind their participation in systematic harassment. It's funny, Marcus mused, how quickly the whole power structure collapsed once people realized it was built on fear rather than respect, like a house of cards that looked solid until someone actually tested its foundation. The Connor family had left Millfield entirely, relocating to another state where Richard Connor's business interests were less well known, and the family name didn't immediately trigger conversations about corruption and abuse of power. Trace himself was completing court-mandated community service and counseling as part of a plea agreement that had allowed him to avoid jail time in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into the culture of impunity that had protected him for so long. "Have you heard anything about how he's doing?" Amar asked, not from sympathy, but from curiosity about whether genuine change was possible for someone who had been so thoroughly insulated from consequences. His counselor contacted Dr. Rodriguez last month, Marcus replied. Apparently he's making progress. Slow progress, but the kind that might actually stick. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way people can start building something real. As they walked through the transformed hallways, Amara reflected on her own journey over the past months. The girl who had hoped to simply keep her head down and graduate had instead become a symbol of resistance and a catalyst for systemic change. The irony wasn't lost on her. By refusing to accept an unjust situation, she had found herself at the center of a movement that extended far beyond one high school in one small town. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the news story about the district recognition ceremony. So proud of you, baby. Grandma would be proud too." The reference to her grandmother, who had passed away 2 years earlier, brought a bittersweet smile to Amara's face. It had been her grandmother's voice that had guided her through those crucial moments when she had to choose between submission and resistance, between peace and justice. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Just thinking about how we got here, about all the people who made this change possible." Amara gestured toward the bustling hallway where students moved with the easy confidence of people who felt safe in their environment. It wasn't just about one confrontation or one viral video. It was about a community deciding that the old way of doing things wasn't acceptable anymore. The afternoon brought Amara's favorite class of the day, the peer mediation workshop that Dr. Rodriguez had asked her to help facilitate. The program brought together students who had been victims, bystanders, and even former perpetrators of harassment to learn conflict resolution skills and create a new model for addressing problems before they escalated. Today we're talking about the difference between punishment and accountability. Amara addressed the circle of 15 students who had signed up for the voluntary program. Can anyone explain what that means? Sophia raised her hand. Punishment is about making someone suffer for what they did wrong. Accountability is about helping them understand the harm they caused and take responsibility for making it right. Exactly, Amara nodded approvingly. And which approach do you think is more likely to prevent the same harmful behavior from happening again? The discussion that followed was rich with insights from students who had experienced both sides of the harassment equation. Former bullies shared their struggles to understand why they had felt the need to hurt others, while former victims explored how to reclaim their power without simply reversing the cycle of abuse. I used to think that getting revenge would make me feel better, shared Alex, a sophomore who had been targeted for months by older students. But what actually helped was seeing them face real consequences and learning to treat people differently. When someone genuinely changes their behavior, it feels like justice in a way that just getting them in trouble never could. As the session ended and students headed to their final classes of the day, Amara found herself walking alone through the hallway where her confrontation with Trace had taken place 3 months earlier. The physical space looked identical, but the energy was completely different. Where there had once been an undercurrent of tension and fear, there was now the comfortable buzz of a community that trusted its own processes for addressing conflict. Her phone rang with a call from Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who had represented her family during the legal proceedings. Amara, I wanted to let you know that the civil rights settlement has been finalized. The district has agreed to fund anti-harassment programs in all 12 schools, and they're establishing a permanent oversight committee to monitor implementation. That's wonderful news, Amara replied, though her tone carried more satisfaction than excitement. The legal victory felt like a natural conclusion to a process that had always been about more than money or punishment. There's something else, Jennifer continued. The Department of Education has asked if you'd be willing to participate in a national conference on student empowerment. They want to use Millfield as a case study for how communities can address systemic harassment. Amara considered the invitation as she walked toward the exit where her mother would be waiting. 6 months ago, the idea of speaking publicly about her experiences would have felt overwhelming. Now it seemed like a natural extension of the work she had already been doing. I'll think about it, she said, but only if Sophia and Marcus can participate too. This was never about one person. It was about a community finding its voice. As she pushed through the main doors and stepped into the afternoon sunshine, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Millfield hoping to remain invisible, to avoid conflict, to simply survive until graduation. Instead, she had discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Dr. Johnson's Honda was waiting in the pickup line, its modest appearance a sharp contrast to the luxury vehicles that had once dominated the school's social hierarchy. As Amara slid into the passenger seat, her mother studied her face with the diagnostic skill that made her an excellent nurse. "You look peaceful, Doctor," Johnson observed, "different from when this all started." "I feel different," Amara agreed, "like I understand something about myself and the world that I didn't know before." "And what's that?" Amara was quiet for a moment, watching the school recede in the side mirror as they drove away. "That standing up for what's right isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone who comes after you. And that when people work together, they can change systems that seem impossible to change." As they drove through the quiet streets of Millfield, Amara thought about her grandmother's voice and the lessons about dignity, courage, and the responsibility that comes with strength. She thought about Sophia's transformation from victim to advocate, about Marcus's evolution from witness to leader, about Jamie's discovery that documenting injustice could be its own form of activism. Most of all, she thought about the dozens of students who had found their voices after seeing someone else refuse to be silenced, who had discovered that speaking truth to power was not only possible, but necessary for the health of any community that aspired to justice. The story that had started with one girl refusing to pay protection money had become something larger, proof that individuals could indeed change systems, that courage was contagious, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with violence, but with the simple revolutionary act of refusing to accept that things had to remain the way they had always been. As they pulled into their driveway, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from a student at another school in another state. Saw your story, started my own advocacy group. Thank you for showing us it was possible. She smiled as she turned off her phone, understanding finally that the real victory wasn't in any single confrontation or legal settlement, but in the knowledge that justice, once awakened in one place, had a tendency to spread wherever people were willing to stand up and declare that everyone deserved to feel safe, respected, and valued. Some lessons she realized were worth teaching, no matter how long it took for the whole world to learn them. Subscribe if you agree.